All right, aloha mai kako, everyone, one and all. One moment as I get everything situated here. Okay. Yeah, what is going on, everybody? Happy Sunday to you all. Yellow Ten Gun here, hanging out and just tuning in. It is the day after my solar return. Had a birthday yesterday and it was great. I did a solo out in the wilderness. It was a wonderful, wonderful time. Spent the morning grounding, doing some much needed yard work, and am live now here on Quantum Wizardry, the art and science of bending reality. And this is a fun topic for me. I'm going to be launching a number of different programs, all related to this concept. And, it's something that's very near and dear to my heart because it's something that I have used and have continued to use in my everyday life, whether it be from specific things around, different health concerns that I've had, whether it's been around even having children. And so it's something that is I've deep dived into for the last 20 years, and I'm really excited to share. And maybe that's a good place to start off, is not just welcoming one and all who is and are joining both live on Facebook, on the Zoom, as well as on Instagram. I'm going between two different cameras as a way. So I'll be bouncing between here on Instagram and here on Zoom/Facebook. And, I think that's a good thing to do, is to just start off by sharing one of the reasons that it's so relevant to me. And so in 2014, I was told that I could not have children. And this was something that for me at the time was huge because I had always wanted to have a family. I had always wanted to be, not even wanted, I knew I was going to be a dad. And so all of a sudden, what I knew to be truth and what I was being told were two vastly different things. And this was significant because coming from a household where I was raised by a single parent, coming from a place where I didn't really know my dad growing up, I wanted that, I needed that at the time. And I also knew it, not just in my head, not even just within my heart, within my body, within what we say in Hawaiian, the na'au, my spiritual center knew that this was true. And so to hear something that was inconsistent with that, to hear something that was saying the exact opposite, well, that just didn't stand. And so I was at a crossroads of sorts. I was at a place where I had to choose between putting that energy, my own faith and attention into what I knew to be true, or to place it into somebody else. And we have these moments periodically in our lives where we are at a crossroads. And these crossroads are significant because we have been told so often in one form or another that we simply cannot do or be or to have. And yet when we're able to actually use our level of awareness to influence the very person, the being that we are, then everything changes. When we have the tools that allow us to not just manifest, to actually materialize into reality what it is that we so desire, there is something powerful and profound to that. And so being told that I wasn't able to have children was huge because I knew something else to be true. And I had two inconsistencies in terms of these realities, and I had a choice. And so at the time, I had been doing about 3 years of personal development. I had deep dove at the time in fitness and wellness with high performance athletics, as well as post rehabilitation work. And so a lot of it was actually working for the mental perspective. And so I started to put the tools and techniques to work. So it was something that really did require not just a shift in my own perspective. It was an entire pivot in terms of how I identified reality itself. And so having at that time, again, that was 2014. So I had been in all that studying the occult sciences. I had a number of ayahuasca ceremonies under my belt. And so I applied the tools and the technologies to my life, to my aspirations. And so I dove into it every morning, every day, every afternoon. There were things that I did that ultimately, and this was April of 2014, we had for our first child, found out that we were pregnant in August of that same year. And so to be able to not just believe in myself in the face of being told something else, not just to have the audacity to place that attention, that awareness, and that energy into myself, to be able to see the results. And now at the time, I had been leveraging these same tools and these same resources again and again and again. However, this was it was not just very real, it was very raw and incredibly relevant to what it is that I had identified as my reality. And so now, with two beautiful children in the world, there are ways that each and every one of us, when we know how to not just leverage universal law, to apply it in a way that's real, meaningful, and accessible. Because a lot of what I had been studying in the occult sciences, I don't know if you can see behind me, these are just some of my books. Good 30% of them go into esotericism and the occult sciences and consciousness. And so when we are able to apply them in a very real way, things change. And a lot of what I had studied and learned in the books, whether it be shamanistic practices, whether it be ceremonial magical rituals, whether it be just generalizations in terms of the nature of reality itself, that's really kind of heady. A lot of it can be very heady. And so how do we take all of that information, decades, centuries, sometimes, depending upon who you talk to, millennia of information, and how do we ground it into everyday practices, strategies that allow us to work and co-create in a very different way? Well, that's effectively what this whole concept of quantum wizardry is. When we talk about quantum wizardry, it's quantum, the smallest measurable unit of effectively energy, and wizardry, how we can speak. If you look at concepts around wizardry and the etymology of it, it ties back to one word or another, kind of related to speaking. And so how do we speak into our own cells, the particles, the atoms of our body? Because I've done this again and again to be able to against all odds, be able to have incredibly different outcomes than I was told from Western medical sciences, whether we're talking about my seizure disorder or digestive dysfunction, or again, with being able to co-create children. And so we can use this in terms of our own health, well-being, and vitality. However, we can also utilize this in a way that allows us to interact with the world around us as well. Using these technologies, I was able to, for example, take my 15-year plan and consolidate it into 6. And so there are any number of ways that we can interact, interplay, and ultimately interface with not just the world within, also with the world around. And yet that is a key part to look at that. As above, so below, as within, so without. There is a relationship in terms of how we ourselves are able to interact with our, not just what's happening within our body, within the inner awareness, and how that corresponds, the inner world corresponds with the world around us. And so it's such a cool thing, because I get really excited and inspired by this, because when we are able to exercise dominion, rather to have autonomy, or to be able to really act upon the world around us in a way that is conscientious and is also responsible, we can do amazing things. We have and we continue to do amazing things. And so how do we speak into the world a new reality? How is it that we can utilize techniques that have and continue to prove viable for solutions, energy that's infused with the very vital forces of our own consciousness. And how can we create beauty of that, which is where the art and science of bending reality comes in. So we're going to be talking a little bit about all of that today. Starting off, though, let us go into a simple yet profound technique. So I invite all of you to, for a moment, just close your eyes and just take a moment to breathe. And as you breathe, just observe your own process of breath. Are you breathing quickly? Slowly? Are you breathing deeply into your abdomen? More shallowly within your chest? And however it is that you are currently inhaling and exhaling, knowing there's no correct way to do it, just to simply observe. Take a moment to observe the sounds that surround you, that of my voice, perhaps the ambient noise in the background, perhaps of the cityscape, maybe that of nature. And as you allow yourself to feel into the sensations of this now, whatever it is your body is feeling, the temperature of the room you're sitting in, the entirety and the totality of this now. Take a moment quietly inside of yourself. Simply set an intention for yourself, for today, the remainder of this day. And when ready, please feel free to again open your eyes now, once more to engage the world around you. All right. Well, welcome back. I'll just take a moment with eyes open now, just to feel into this moment. How are you feeling? What is it that you're feeling? What is the experience of this now like for you? For me, I feel more calm. I feel more rested. I feel more relaxed. Feel a little more light and happy. And that's a great thing, because what we've been able to effectively do within the 3-minute period is to shift the rate of respiration, our heart rate, and just a bit into what's called our heart rate variability. Now, when we drop into this more restful state, it's a good place to be. In fact, it is a prime space to be within, especially as we're talking about materialization. Now, one of the things about that, as we talk about quantum wizardry, the art and science of bending reality, is inevitably we get to all the things that we want, right? And whether that's an ideal relationship, whether that's, perfect health, whether that be more money, the things that we want, I would say, are generally wanted for us. And so in that, we want to be able to get ourselves into a state of being. And the state of beingness is what will inevitably translate to what is being done, that's doing, as well as what it is that we can have. Now, as we look at these parts and pieces, when we're in this more centered state of awareness, we've reclaimed our energy. We've been able to retract our attention. We've been able to recall what it is that is ours, and that is awareness. And as we do that, we feel more relaxed, which one brings up the question of what is our normal? Is our normal usually a matter of us being more stressed? And if that's the case, we're not actually in that ideal situation or state of being to really materialize what it is we want. Rather, we're in a more stressed state, and that's not our best. That's not the best version of us. And in this place, this is one of the 12 principles that we'll be talking about over the course of quantum wizardry in terms of those aspects of universal law. Now, before we go a little too far further with all of this, one thing I do want to point out is that there is a difference between manifestation, as it's been called and is generally identified as in our pop culture and mass media, and there's materialization, which are vastly different things. Manifestation is and are fields of information that exist yet have not materialized yet. Material reality, as we identify it as, is something that really is of substance, right? I can say that I want a cookie. However, if a cookie has not materialized in my hands for me to eat it, then it continues to be unmaterialized, unrealized. It is in actuality an unactualized field of manifestation. And so we want to distinguish those two things because they are fundamentally different. They are fundamentally different. And the difference is that I'll have, my cup of matcha has materialized because look, there it is. One moment. Whereas the manifestation field, that is the desire to drink a hot cup of matcha, is just that. It is a field of information that has not come into our reality yet. So as we look at that, then one of the things that we want to do is being able to take that of what it is that we desire from the place of a thought and to be able to take it into material reality. Now, when we do this, this is where we speak into the world a new reality. And there are certain principles that we want to be able to apply. And that breath work that we just started off with, especially if you do it a little longer, that is great when you're out and about and you just want to recenter your energy. However, when you're able to take that even a little longer, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, stay in that place for 20 minutes, then, and especially then, things come back tenfold because we are staying in this state of being. And beingness is one of the tricks, the tools, technologies, and techniques that allow us to really move forward. Now, who the heck am I? And why should you give a rip about anything that I have to say? Well, as I mentioned in my intro story, I've used these techniques for a while. So I studied psychology back in college, particularly had a very particular interest in Jungian psychology and existential psychology. And so I didn't realize it at the time yet that I was going to go further into and through my own dark night of the soul, which drastically and dramatically altered where I was going and how I am here today. Where that has led has been in a deep study for the last 15 years on everything from the occult sciences to ceremonial magical practices to the more esoteric backing for a lot of religious concepts, to things around parapsychology and psychology, to everything from intuitive talents to looking at things around quantum physics, string theory, and most recently and more exclusively now, what's called quantum morphogenetic physics. And so when we talk about that, that really brings in a big part in terms of what I bring into this concept of quantum in the quantum wizardry, is looking at how the concepts around quantum morphogenetic physics can be leveraged in our own wizardry, our own magic, our own self-expression, and how it is that, again, we can use the wisdom of our lives to speak into the world, casting into reality a new way of being. And then how our desires can not just be held within manifestation fields, they can materialize into our physical reality. And that has been my course of study. So 15 years ago, oh, wow, no, that's more than 15 years ago. 2005, wow, okay, 18 years ago. 2005 was a turning point, and it was one that sent me into my own dark night of the soul. I grew up without my dad around, and so I didn't really have a consistent male role model in my life. And so what ended up happening was I made a great connection with my uncle Dave, which was my mom's younger brother. And he suddenly, 18 years ago ish, passed away. And when that happened, it was such shock to me. And this is effectively what spurs, our awakening process, is that we have an abrupt shift in world perspective. Something happens and it can build and it can build and it can build, and then at some point it breaks. And so when it happened for me, it changed who it is that I wanted to become and where I saw my place in the world. And so that directed me into an area of really deep diving into things about the physical body, around health, or around well-being. And while initially it was a matter of our own physicality, looking at everything from high performance athletics to post rehabilitation training, it went. Oh, what just happened? One moment. Oh, I see. And so what ended up happening was that I deep dove into that, which inevitably led to, in those aspects of reactivation of latent muscle tissue, was then bringing in a mental component. How can visualization and meditation be actually very beneficial to everything from those high performance athletic sports to being able to reclaim a certain degree of autonomy within our physical body? And so with that, then it started to go deeper beyond that in terms of meditation and going into areas of personal development, specifically for myself. Yet I wanted to know not just what was being taught in mass, I wanted to know what the source material was. And this was around the time that things like The Secret were coming out. And so I wanted to look at everything behind that, which led me into looking at things around Hermetic principles and looking at Kabbalistic magical practices, going into the Golden Dawn and even into Egyptian texts and Sumerian processes, as well as things along the lines of everything from shamanism to things in relationship to different groups, a lot around indigenous groups and spirituality. And so this was like a 5-year period, 2009 to 14. And that led further down into other areas of interest, which went into everything around the nature of reality. So I got really into creation myths for about a 2-year period, looking at everything from the Hawaiian perspective of the Kumulipo to looking at the things around the Vedas and even, the Bible, talking about the logos and the sound coming into, speaking into reality, right? And that led into areas around deep diving into quantum physics, things around string theory, going into areas around, the theory of relativity. And a lot of it got to be very, very heady. Yet my own process in this concept of wizardry is immersive experiential learning. And so it's not just a matter of knowing it here. It's not just a matter of experiencing it here. It's something that we can viscerally also digest down in the very bowels of our being. And so I took it on as a course of study for about another 2 years, diving into that, which inevitably led into other areas and ultimately flashing forward to where I am now in consolidating a lot of these things. How do we blend the ancient teachings and create them in a way that modern day techniques as well as technology can be leveraged? And that's a big part of this concept of quantum wizardry, is how do we actually not just utilize, how do we leverage these laws on our behalf in a way, again, that is conscientious, respectful, and responsible? Because there's a certain degree as we really walk in these areas that I have of just reverence for what is, whether we identify it as God, the universe, source, the pervasive, ever-knowing intelligence that exists in all things. Because as we start to get into now around these concepts of quantum morphogenetic physics, that everything has a field of information down to the very particles that comprise you as they do me, have a field of information that we can interact when we know how to with them as well as with the world around us. Yet this whole concept of quantum wizardry, we really want to get into a place where we're able not to just have these spontaneous experiences, which we all are having one way or another, to be able to consistently access specifically the phenomena that we are intending. So put differently, personal training days, right? I would have someone walk in who maybe has never exercised a day in their lives. And that was actually more beneficial. And there is a greater capacity that this person had than perhaps the high school, athlete who had played 4 years in high school and hadn't maybe touched anything for about 10 years. Now, the reason is that our muscles can learn, right, these different patterns, and they retain via our, not just the tissue itself, the fascia as well, they retain certain memory of it. This is called neuromuscular efficiency or communication, and is something that if a person comes in as a clean slate, has the capacity to do it in a way that allows the right muscles to activate in the right coordination at the right time, which is not always the case for someone who has learned, yet maybe without the proper reinforcement. We want to reinforce the proper patterns, yet we often use these other patterns in life. It still gets the job done, yet there's inevitably a cost. And so as we talk about this, then one of the things that we really want to get to and be able to work with is how is it that we can activate the right aspects of ourselves in the right way to have the desired result, and to do so in a way that does not harm or hurt ourselves or others. Because as we really begin to look at all of this, then there are inevitably a number of different ways to do a number of different things. There's a number of different ways to do one single thing. We want to be able to do it in a way that is ultimately in the best interest of ourselves and for the greatest good. And so as we look at that as sort of a premise, as the direction of where all of this is going into, where all of this leads into, is basically the first stage of quantum wizardry is called vitality. And so this is all about our physicality. Now, a big part of that ties to our nervous system. And our nervous system is going to seek out certain things in certain ways because that is what it does, and that's how it's been reinforced. And unless we're aware of that, whether it be trauma related or whether it be something that quote unquote soothes the nervous system, then it is actually largely run within the context of our subconscious mind, making decisions on our behalf. And it is something that we want to be able to shift, because often our nervous system is kind of tweaked. It's stressed. And for some people who have lived their entire lives with a hyperactive nervous system, they will actually seek those stressors in their lives because that is what they know, and that is what their nervous system actually desires. Now, if we're talking though, as we go further into this whole process of quantum wizardry within not just the vitality, but within our own genius and into legacy, collective legacy work, then we want to be able to more regularly and with a higher degree of accuracy access what our intuition is saying, because our own inner compass is something that allows us, when we are more in tune and it is attuned, to yield just some powerful information. The intuitive mind is incredible. And when we are able to really honor, not just access, to honor the information that we are in communication with, and be able to definitely listen, heed, and have it as an ongoing guide, then things begin to change in our lives, right? We've all had those moments where we're driving down the road and something says stop or turn. And our conscious mind be like, oh, no, just keep going. Yet when we listen to it, we maybe not in that moment, perhaps after the fact, we know. I mean, I've had instances where something just said not to go, or something said to turn left rather than right. And within minutes, sometimes seconds, something happened. I recall this one area where I was driving, and ever since then, I've kind of made this my steady practice. I was driving and the light was green, and I was at a stop. I was at a stoplight, light turned green, and something just said, wait. And so I waited, and I looked right, and I was like, oh, that's kind of weird. I don't see anything. And I looked left, and there was this car that just came barreling across the way, not heeding the red light that they had. So had I just gone when the light was green, I would have gotten plummeted from that exact side on the driver's side of the car. Yet my intuition said, wait. And so I did. Now we have these micro moments, though, throughout the entirety of our lives. We have these micro moments where our conscious mind, our subconscious mind, and what I'm going to identify as the superconscious mind are all in communication. However, we tend to listen to the louder voices. Those voices in our head can be freaking loud AF. The sensations of the heart and our emotions can be so pronounced that it's difficult to even hear anything else. Yet, behind all of that, as author Michael Singer talks about, the witness exists, the quiet voice of inner observation and connectivity. And this is a voice that doesn't need to yell. It doesn't. It doesn't need to have long-winded explanations about what is or what is not. It is the most simple line of communication. Sometimes it's not even a word, it's just a deep knowing. Sometimes it's as simple as yes, no, stay, go. And so as we look at this as a part of this whole concept of quantum wizardry, this is a part, however, it is a particularly important piece of this dynamic person, the presence of who we are. And so this first stage of vitality is all about the nervous system. We want to be able to recondition the nervous system so we can recalibrate our own consciousness. And all that means is, instead of always being in a state of fight or flight, we allow it to drop into its opposite of rest and digest. Because when we're in a fight or flight state, we have high beta wave frequencies, often in the left hemisphere, which can dominate a lot of our thought processes. And it's difficult when in a place of sheer intellect to be able to shift into that place of intuition, because our intuitive talents are most active when we're in a more state of what some people call flow, right? However, when we're stuck in a state of stress, then we get these little snippets of our intuition. However, it doesn't always mean that we're able to access it when we really want those deeper answers, when we're really seeking our own inner wisdom. And so in stage 1 vitality, it's a 3-month piece that we're really just going to be looking at the reconditioning of the nervous system. That's going to come in through breath work. That's going to come in what's called myofascial release or rolling. That's going to come in terms of immersion in nature and meditation and all these different things in a way that's very neat, yet is something that I have used again and again and again for myself and my clients to be able to establish a foundation. And this foundation is important because it's something that we can then build upon or create from. And so we want to have a foundation and a platform that allows us to set ourselves up for success. And in doing so, allows us then to really be in a more open space of potentiality, to be able to create from a place that allows us to imagine, greatly into the world. And that place of imagination, of intuition, is something that really is going to be the output and the intention for the first 3 months of the Quantum Wizardry program. And so I have been talking on for a bunch, and it looks like I am at my time limit, actually a little bit past. So I acknowledge going a little longer than I had anticipated. It was meant to be a little shorter, yet here we are. And so I have this both on Instagram as well as on Zoom recording and Facebook. I'll be putting out more information through the course of this week. A lot of this ties to the general collective awakening that we're experiencing, moving in from that place of ego and into essence, and looking at how we can shift into our genius to realize what is called our collective legacy. And our collective legacy, the legacy work, is just a natural flow from our genius. It is how we make the world better simply for having been, and inevitably takes a collective to be able to accomplish it. Kind of think of a symphony of sorts, where there is a conductor who leads on this particular piece, yet at the same time, that same conductor can also be a viola or percussion in someone else's orchestra as well. And so we're getting into some really interesting things in these unfoldings, or almost like a fern, an unfurling. And as this happens, it's super exciting for all of us. And I invite you to check things out as they continue, whether it be here on any of the social media feeds, or also I've got a ton of stuff on YouTube that helps with all of these pieces. I got about 130 videos. It breaks down each and every one of these aspects, and I will continue to put out video content from here on out. That is it for now, though. I've got to go feed the cat and some other things to do around the house. Love and aloha for you all, though. Take care, and ahui ho.